Hello, everyone. I am Andra and welcome to Building Community. Today, I have a very exciting person with me, Laurie Hardie. So, she is the master of all things. She's a speaker, a radio personality, she's an author, she does publishing, and she really tries to inspire women to find their voice and leave their legacy. So, I was recently on one of her podcasts, Interrupted. She could tell you a little bit more about that if she likes. But I just fell in love with who she is as a person, and I wanted to have her as a guest on my show. So please help me welcome Laurie Hardie. Hello.
Hello, thank you.
So I'm so excited you're here. So tell me a little bit more about helping women because you do coach women to find their voice. So do you run into a lot of people that because of past experiences they have difficulty really sharing who they are and their truth?
Yeah, and sometimes I think people don't realize how important their story is. It really hit me when I was working for, I had started a women's day center for homeless women. And we decided that on one day a week, we would have people share how they got out of homelessness because they would come have coffee with us and pretty soon they would find their way and we'd help them with resources and we'd have them come back. So there was this one volunteer that worked with us and we said, "Will you do Testimony Tuesday?" And she kept saying no. And finally I said, how come you don't want to do Testimony Tuesday? She goes, "I don't have a story." And I looked at her, I said, "Seriously?" And she said, "Yeah, well, I've never done drugs or alcohol." And I go, "But you have a story." She just looked at me so blankly. Now, let me tell you about this amazing woman. She was volunteering with us, but 5 years prior, she was at her job listening to the radio when a news break came across and told a story about a bridge that just collapsed on a family not too far from where she was working. And the whole office was, "Oh, that's terrible. We know that bridge." Well, about an hour later, she gets a phone call. It's her daughter, her son in law, and her grandbaby.
Oh my God.
And I said, "You don't think you have a story?" And she goes, "Who would want to hear that story?" Well, after talking to her, because the women absolutely adored her, she got up and she shared her story, and there was not a dry eye in the room. And three of the women came up to her and said, "That's why I'm on the street. I lost my family and I had no resources, and I ended up on the streets because I couldn't get out of depression or whatever their story was." And now she goes around telling her story, but she didn't realize the value of it. And then often women of our generation, let's say 50s, 60s and on, we were told to be quiet. So if there was abuse and trauma, there, first of all, there wasn't help for it. Second of all, most people didn't believe it because they re-victimized the victim. And so we live this life of keeping our story in us. And in your field, Andra, what happens when we keep our secrets inside?
We get sick.
Yep.
You're only as sick as your secrets is the saying. Yes, it does. Anything that you hold on to creates sickness in the body, that stress, that trauma, all of that. It turns into so many other things in our body. So sad.
Yeah, it really is. And the thing is we don't have to go and tell our story to everyone. But finding a place to speak our truth so that we can sort it out. I remember hearing a neuroscientist say one time, until we speak it or write it, like journal it, it bounces around in our head and it can't find the file cabinet. It doesn't know where
Mm.
to go. So once we speak it, and how often have we been listening to a friend who's like really mad, really upset, and they're just going on, and we're really good listeners. We just listen, and then they go like this, "Oh, oh, I just figured it out." Right? Because when we have a place to tell our story or to work things out, when people listen well, then we can move on. But if not, we hold on to it and we believe the lie. So if we were a child and abused, we might have been told we're worthless. So now we're an adult, but we that child message is still in our head. And I love what you do with the affirmations because getting those thoughts, those negative thoughts out is so important because we don't often know we have them until we're able to speak them. And then we can start to turn them around.
I think a lot of people don't realize that it's practice. I mean, 15 years ago, I was in a body that I couldn't stand to look at, right? I'm a different person today. But I knew I was capable of what I wanted because I was in that place too, right? So sometimes if we can reflect on, look back at a time when things were really good, it's usually our answer to how to get back. And a lot of people don't realize that. So I was that upbeat, positive person, and then I wasn't. I became negative Nelly. Like life had beat me down so bad that I was just that negative person who didn't feel good, like all of those things you just said. And I had to retrain my brain. I happens on Chad Helmstetter, things we say when we talk to ourselves. And just by listening to him, my life changed in so many ways because I said it can't be that easy, but we're gonna do it anyway. Because what
Yeah.
do I have to lose, right? So I love that you do that, and I really, really think that when women start to speak their truth, they find a power like no other because they stop believing they're worthless. They start believing that it's okay to share your feelings, good, bad, or indifferent. Because let's face it, Laurie, everybody's not going to like what we have to say. But do you hold your tongue and not say anything at all, or you just say what's on your mind and live, a life that you love, right?
Mhm.
So, what got you working with homeless people?
So I had helped with this event. It was called Queen It's a New Day. And they would take people who had just gotten into housing and pamper them, give them clothes. They'd have hairdressers for a whole day, sometimes 2 days. They would pamper them and they would have some teaching and all this stuff. And so I volunteered with that a few times. And the lady said, I keep where they had the closet for the queen because they would give these clothes to the ladies once they wore them for the day. And she said, where I keep my closet, I find women sleeping there all the time. And I just want to have a place for them to come in and sleep. And she said, and I want you to do it. And I want you to pray about it. And I went home and I was so mad because I was looking for work and she was obviously not going to pay me. And now she's asking me to pray about doing something that I worked in downtown Seattle at night and homeless people were pretty scary at night because I didn't know, you'd be at the bus stop and they approach you. Well, you're a single woman at night. And so I said, I'm afraid of homeless people. So I did, and I went home and I was mad. I was just telling God, this is not fair. I am asking you for a job and you're telling me to volunteer. Well, I got the message loud and clear in my heart. Let's just do it. And so I did a little GoFundMe campaign to help support me while I did it. We found where the closet was. They had a little extra Sunday school room. I called all my girlfriends, said, can you either come for a couple hours a day or bring soup? And people started coming and the ladies would come. We'd just all sit, we'd laugh. We had the best time. And we tried to make it look really beautiful. Well, they would start to walk in and they would back up because they'd think, oh, this isn't for me. And we're like, hey, come in and have coffee and soup. And it was just a really beautiful thing. I knew I was to start it and then hand it off to whoever was next. But it was just this amazing thing. And I fell in love with these ladies. They still all text me all the time. And there was one woman, and she was a little bit scary. And in fact, a couple of feeding programs had stopped because she had come in and gotten in one of her, maybe been on drugs and had a knife and scared people. And so she would come in, and if she would get out of line, we'd have to call the police. But she was pretty scary. And if you were to ask me, of all these women, who would get their act together and get help, it would never be her. I would have said her name. I would have said she would never get help. She was, there was, I would have, I feel like I believe in hope for everyone, but I thought she will never. Well, you know what? She got into rehab. She got recovery. She got into housing. And I asked her, I said, what was different this time? And she said, every time I would come back, totally disillusioned. I'd done terrible things, and you ladies would just love me and give me coffee and talk to me. You never said, "Hey, we tried to help you and you're terrible." She said, "You just kept loving me." And she is 7 years clean and sober. She lost her cat, which was a trauma, could have set her back. Her twin sister, identical twin sister, died of that flesh eating because she was also on the streets. That could have set her back. but she has stayed sober and she has been working so hard. And I'm so proud of her. And she has a story to tell, but she has no voice. She had cancer and she has a hole in her throat. And so she's starting to write her story finally.
Oh wow, that's such a beautiful story. I mean, it's just like heart-wrenching in a lot of ways. You know, I've been around the rooms of recovery for a long time, and there are people that have been sober really, really, really long time, and then go out after 25, 30 years, and I'm just flabbergasted. Like you were doing, why would you give that up? And then there are people that struggle, and finally get it, and
Yeah.
their life changes. But
Yeah.
having someone that believes in you is more than gold. It's more than any gold you can have. There's very few people that you can count on that really truly support you and just love you, in spite of who everything, right? They just love you unconditionally. I think
Yeah.
more people should be giving of themselves in that way, but not when just not in that world sometimes.
Yeah, I think we can let fear get in the way. And when I would have new volunteers, I would do a training, but they'd be so excited. The minute a homeless lady would come in, they go, "Hi, how are you?" And I'd like take them aside. I go, "She slept outside in the pouring rain, terrified she's going to be raped or worse. I don't think she wants to tell you how she is. Can you just say, 'Hi, here's a cup of coffee?'"
Oh wow.
But one of my favorite, oh, go ahead.
I think some people just they mean well, but they're not used to being exposed to it because my head went to how what could she possibly be doing, you know? But there are some people that are on the street by choice. They
Mhm.
can't deal with like rules and regulations and stuff because and it might just be because they've lived out of society so long that they don't want to answer to conventional ways of living, you know?
And yeah. And when we love people, do we put our stuff on them or do we love them where they are? Because a lot of the volunteers are like, we got to get you housing. Well, they got this one girl into housing and she was like that. She wanted to be on the streets. It was easier for her. And so they got her into housing and she stayed one night and disappeared. And they were so mad at her. How could she give this up? And I go, did she ask you for housing or did you tell her you were going to get her housing? Like, well, we wanted to get her housing. I go, but did you ask her if she wanted housing? Well, of course she would want housing. I said, but obviously she ran away. You did all this work and she ran away. What if you just let them be? And when they're ready, they'll know, like, and trust you, and then they can ask you to help them. It's like
Absolutely.
so often, and we saw this with missionaries, they would go into countries and they would take their seeds and they would take their agenda. It's like, can't we go and love people right where they're at and not try to change them and bring them into our world? Let's just be non-judgmental and loving. And that was such a wonderful experience for me. I absolutely love those ladies. And if I'm sitting out at a Starbucks in my city, the homeless women all come by, drop their backpacks and hug me.
Listen, this is such beautiful stuff, and I really love what you said about do we have to bring our stuff with us? Because I think that whether it's not just generational stories, we're all brought up with our own perceptions of things, and what we feel is good and decent and how a life should be, we shouldn't impart that on other people. We don't get to decide what their life should be or shouldn't be. Just like we want the ability to decide what we do in our own life, we do have to extend that to other people because I'd be really upset if someone told me, Andra, you need to live here or here or here. It's better for you or it's closer to this and didn't give me my say in. And honestly, that's kind of what happened when I came online. People were telling me how to show up and how to be, and I said, no, that's just not going to work. And when I first showed up online, Lori, true story, I was just so happy to help and just doing what I do in my regular job. And then I got all these voices in my head that tell me, oh no, you won't attract this and you won't attract this. And I just became like Nurse Ratched on the line because I was so unhappy with what they were telling me. And but no, it doesn't work that way. No, don't. And I had to let that go and stop listening to their version of me because that didn't sit with who I really was. And it's the
Mm,
same with the ladies that you worked with. Of course, they're hungry and they want to come in and eat and stuff. But even it's not that they might not want housing necessarily. Some of them just don't. But maybe they're just not in a place where they trust. We don't know what life and the conditions that they've lived to and how much, I was very beat down. I wasn't in a trusting place. So if I was in that situation and someone came to me, I might accept the coffee, but that I'd be very closed off until I could trust someone again, right? And to
right.
really ask for that help.
And also telling those kind of stories, like telling fun, good stories, that's fun. But when we have to tell a story about how we were broken, one of my favorite stories, it was called Esther's Place, was this sweet young girl who I loved. She was kind of interning with me. She had been on the street. She had got into rehab and recovery. She had done Our Queen, It's a New Day. She also did a culinary program. And so she was volunteering with me and she smoked. So she would go out and smoke with the ladies and they loved her and she knew everything. Like I knew nothing. I was so naive. And she's like, oh no, they can get that through this service. Or, oh, she knew all the things. And if you met her, you would never know she had been homeless. And she had a little boy and she got custody of him and she was back being his mom. So one day, this woman came in with the biggest smile. This woman, Mindy, had the best smile, but she was filthy dirty because she'd been sleeping outside. And she came in and they saw each other. And right in front of my face, they ran to each other and they were hugging and jumping up and down and just hugging. And I'm like looking at them and I said, how did you two meet? And they both looked at me and they said, jail.
Oh, wow.
But one had found recovery and help, the other hadn't yet. But the everything was leveled. They just loved each other. And
That
that was such
bond,
a
they
message to
experiencing
me.
something similar and that bond, that because when we meet, you can meet people in the good time of your life. Like you were just saying, everybody wants to share in the good time, but it's very few people that will be beside you in the bad. And you remember those people. I know I do. You
Yeah.
know, um, they're still in my life today.
Yeah.
So, they're still there. So I love that you do that. I love that this is how your journey unfolds and stuff. So are you doing a similar type thing now?
No, so when I was doing that, my job was to get it up and running and train people to take it over so that the volunteers would run it. And I was working in radio at the time, so every day I would dress up to go be on the air. And I think they thought because most of the volunteers would wear jeans and dress down so they feel comfortable. I think they thought like, oh, she's a little, goody two shoes. She doesn't know anything. Well, one day I was talking with one of the gals and I told them how I had been homeless with three kids and they were shocked. And that's the power of our story is that telling the story we don't want to tell. Like, I didn't want to go to my business network group and say I was homeless with three kids. That makes me feel like a loser. But on the other hand, it gives women hope. It gives people hope to be like, hey, if she did it, maybe I can do it too. And that's why the power of the story and why telling our story and not just blurting it out, but so I teach podcasting and especially for busy women that already they don't even know they already have content. In 7 days, I can get you up and running on a podcast. But our story isn't always for to be published. But if we take time on our phone with either a video or audio recording, and we tell one story about one kid or one story about our childhood, and we just leave it on our phone, what do people hold on to when we pass away now? They take our phone, they search our phone to find something to remember them. It used to be the answering machine. Hi, this is Laurie. Leave a message. Remember, people would
Yeah.
keep those forever and ever. Well, now we can leave this legacy and we can just by leaving things on our phones so that our kids aren't interested now. They don't really care. Mine don't. But when I'm gone, they might want to know, hey, how did I come up with their names? How did things that maybe they think they know, but they don't. So leaving a legacy is so important. And if we have childhood trauma, we talk about ACEs on my podcast?
We do.
adverse childhood experiences. Many people don't even understand that maybe they're reacting to things, they're behaving a certain way because they had childhood trauma. And so they're reacting versus acting to situations. Well, when we start to tell our story, we can then get help and support, and then we can heal. And then it helps, like what you said earlier, it helps everyone around us when we start to flush out all those things. For one thing is like, those people when you try to compliment them and they're like, no, no, no. And then you feel bad because you tried to give them a compliment and then you never want to compliment them again.
Yeah.
It's not really about the complimenter, it's about the person being complimented they can't receive. And
Yeah.
and you were telling me how hard it is to receive, but the best thing we can do is learn how to be a good receiver because that blesses us and it blesses people around us.
I absolutely agree with you there. So the Go-Giver, I don't know if you've ever read that book, but talks about giving and receiving, and that we're robbing people of the right to give those compliments and those things, and that you can't be the taker all the time. Because I wasn't very good at receiving compliments. Someone said, "Oh, you look great today." Oh, this whole thing.
Yeah.
So so I've gotten better with that. And I agree that we do give them a place where they feel valued, because it makes them feel good to say nice things to us, right? So we have to be better receivers and more giving, you know. So I think that when you can accept things warmly, you become a better giver. Because
Yeah.
when someone makes you feel really good, if they give you a compliment and really starts your day off, then I think you're more apt to thank someone for a good job, or say, hey, great job you're doing, or, good morning, or just nice things. Because when we receive good all the time, we want to put out more good, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of what my affirmations are about, because they're for me and for people that are listening, you
Hmm.
know. But those are things I say myself. It's like I'm reiterating how I want my day to go, right?
And, we know with neuroscience that our mind can change our brain. So if we're telling our brain something that is positive and wonderful, it's going to go, oh, she wants more of that. But if we're giving our brain, hey, I always trip or everything screws up for me, then suddenly our brain goes, oh, they want things to mess up because the brain doesn't have a decision making. It just, whatever we tell it, then it tries to do that for us. But when
Yeah.
we use our mind to program our brain, one of the things you said about receiving, I had a friend, a single mom, she said, say yes to all good things. And I'm like, I don't know. But then I heard this lady, Roxy, who was doing a speech, and she said, how many of you are givers? And everyone raised their hand. She asked two givers to come up on stage. She goes, how many of you are good at receiving? And a lot of them were like, I don't need to. Like they didn't see it as a big deal. But one lady just raised her hand. So she brought her up on stage. Well, as they came up, she gave him a cup, just a plastic cup, and she went with a pitcher and she goes, would you like some water? And the givers were like, oh, no, I'm good. Second giver, oh, no, I'm good. The receiver was like, yeah, fill her up. And so she filled it up and then she went and put the jug down and went kind of out of the room for a second and came back in. She goes, oh my goodness, I've just walked through the desert and I'm parched. And I heard that there's a room full of givers. You're a giver, right? And she said to the first person, and she said, yes. She goes, do you have some water for me? And of course, no, because she didn't fill her cup up. And she went to the second giver and she goes, I'm so thirsty. Do you have some water for me? And again, this giver, her cup's empty. And the third one, she said, you're a giver, but you're also a receiver. Do you have water? And she poured all the water into her cup so she wouldn't be parched. And I love that story because we want to give and it's easy to give. It's hard to receive, but when we're willing to receive, then we have more to give.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Mhm.
It really is, right?
Yeah.
So
And so
so
when
I
we're
love it.
willing to tell our story, which is hard, but, because we're afraid we'll receive judgment. But often when we finally tell our stories, as hard as they were, I was abused growing up, or I was in a domestic violence marriage, whatever, and like your story,
All
when
of
you tell
those
the
things,
story,
all of the above.
right. But then people go, oh, if she made it through, maybe I can make it through too.
I don't know if we ever feel like we really arrived, you know. I think when you were through those things, it's wanting to do better because you won't give them the satisfaction of of bringing you down. You get to that place where I'm not going to let you do this to me anymore. And um but I don't think you ever really feel like you arrived, even though you release those things, because it's decades later, and the more I write, the more of me unravels, you know. True story, someone said to me, where do you find the ideas for all those books? And I'm just writing about my life. I'm just taking different segments of it because we are so many chapters, and I'm just writing about them, right? So yeah. So
Yeah.
I think, but I definitely think that it gives people the permission to be hopeful, the
Mhm.
permission to look for new answers, the permission to say, I'm okay, it's not that bad. You know, other people have been through it too, right? Because when we we've gone through those things, the homelessness, the addiction, you know, like that woman that was in jail, we think we're the worst people in the world. And then someone else says, oh yeah, so what? I was in jail, it's no big deal. Or I was homeless, so what? You know, and then you're like, really, you know, and it's not that bad. And you see some commonality, and I think all of us experience a lot of the same things in life at different times and, you know, situations, you know, maybe not on the same level, but I think it does. I think it helps us grow, and I think it brings us together as people, those commonalities.
Mhm. So one of the things for me, and I don't talk about this, but two of my dearest friends for my whole life, their moms are mentally ill because my mom was mentally ill, and we accidentally told each other that at some point when we were first meeting. And because of that, we have such a strong bond. But, it's like that's not something I want to go talk about and podcast about and tell everybody about. But those things sometimes we tell everyone, sometimes we tell some person as needed when we're like talking to someone and something comes up and we might go, yeah, that happened to me too. Um, you know, but those are the connections and the bonds because we just go, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Somebody else has been through this. And I think that those are really important connections. And again, it takes being willing to say it. Like, I don't want to say that, my mom's mentally ill. I don't want people knowing that, and so I think it's finding like, the level of who we want to talk to, what we talk to everyone about. Like when I do my classes, I don't talk about childhood abuse. I talk about stories. Um, and when if people want a podcast, we don't just throw up on the audience all of our stuff. We use our stories to help other people make connections. And, we may have a podcast about stories. We never actually tell our story, but we take what we've learned from our story to help other people get through theirs.
I like that. I think that's the best I've heard it explained. So what's next for you? Because we do have to wrap up. So I want people to know what's next for Laurie Hardie, where they can find you, and what fills your cup.
So I love my podcast because I meet people like you. That's how I met you. You reached out when I first put it out. And so my podcast is called Interrupted, Act Two, Reinventing Your Legacy, because I want women to know it's never too late to tell your story. It's never too late to start a business or start over. Like I've sort of inadvertently retired here recently by accident, and I love being home, but I'm not done. I'm not done working. I still want to share the stories. And then I also teach podcasting in a way that's for busy women who maybe they're not going, I want to have a podcast. They go, I know I have to have a podcast to drive people to my business because we find podcasts through SEO. And that's how people can then find us on Facebook or find our webpage. And so a lot of women already have you have a ton of content. They already have the content. Let's turn it into a podcast. And oh, guess what? When you have 52 episodes, Google will translate all of those and voila, you have a book. So it's reusing our content, what we know that we know that we know, what we teach other people, and it's finding a way to help people. And podcasting, even though you can use it to drive people to your product, it's a way to help people for free. It's a way to give tips and tricks and help people. I have a whole podcast series within my podcast of lady podcasters I interviewed. And so it's a way to help people for free. Anybody can go listen to your podcast. And then if you want to help them more, if they want more because they learn to know, like, and trust you, then they can come and work with you and whatever your program is. Then people can find you through your podcast. So I love to teach that. So www.coachlaurie.com is where you can find me, or my Interrupted podcast.
I love all those things. I have a podcast in me yet. So I do the TV shows and the YouTube. I've been switching to audio with the affirmations and stuff. But I think that you capture a different audience. So I love that you do that. A lot of people are visual learners, but a lot of
Yeah.
people will listen in the car
Yes.
or, while they're cooking and stuff like that. So I was thinking about just taking all the shows I've done for the last 4 years and just uploading them.
Yep. I mean, that's the thing. You already have your cover art. You already have your content. And any YouTube, you can go to a converter and turn it into an MP3. Voila, you've got your podcast. And it gives another platform for people that listen when they commute or whatever. Like you said, like for me to watch YouTube, isn't real practical for me because I was commuting so much, but listening to a podcast or a book on tape. And a lot of people have a book. Well, how do I get it? How do I make it into audio? Well, it's all the same principles as podcasting.
Yeah, I think a lot of my books would be good on audio too. So my books are going to festival. Congratulate me. Somebody reached out to me, and one is going to the LA festival. And, I was talking about the guy said, I see you have a lot of books. I'd like to bring them to Beijing, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah. And I thought there were 16. And he came back and said, you have 19 books. I
Oh my
said,
God.
really? I said, well, some of them can stay home. These are the ones I want to go.
Congratulations. That is huge.
I'm
Nice
very
work.
excited. Yeah, I'm very excited. So we'll have another show about that, about what we're up to next. Okay, guys? We'll have another show on that. So, Laurie, one more time, where can they reach you at Interrupt?
So the best place is to go listen to the podcast or go to my webpage. And you have to put the three W's for some reason. Coach Laurie, LAURIE.com. And you can also find my book. Did not see that coming there as well.
Yeah, I want to interview for our narrative night so we can read from your book. You have a copy of your book?
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yes, great. Because we do a show, narrative nights, where authors are actually reading from their stories, because I think there's more people than ever writing stories, but nobody's reading. So trying to change that up a little bit. So I want to thank you so much for coming today and being a fabulous guest. You are a fabulous host as well. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in to Laurie Hardie and Andra. And thank you for joining us on Building Community. Have a good night.